This is Invisible Inc., the podcast for under-resourced women entrepreneurs. And I'm your host, Shubha Chakravarti, founder of Achieve. Join me as I talk to women entrepreneurs about the nuts and bolts of their journeys and to experts who will give you insights that are hard to find anywhere else. Let's jump in. What do you do if your very identity effectively shuts the door on many types of capital as an entrepreneur? How do you get capital for your venture if even the nearest ATM is an hour away? And what can one determined entrepreneur accomplish when all other options simply don't exist for her or even her entire community? In this episode, Vanessa Roanhorse, capital innovator and founder of Roanhorse Consulting, shares eye-opening challenges that Native American women entrepreneurs face in getting capital, the invisible walls that keep them from getting traditional credit financing, her own story of driving breakthrough capital innovation, and much more. Now, here's Vanessa. Hey, Vanessa, welcome to Invisible Inc. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to be here.
So you had a pretty fascinating journey leading up to your work with Indigenous women entrepreneurs. So what is the spark that got you started on this journey?
Well, I think directly it was the struggle of having to start my own company. Starting Roanhorse Consulting wasn't an easy feat. And also, I actually didn't realize I was starting something that was going to be my job forward. It was a moment in which I needed some startup capital. And when we started to get going, it was really just myself. And the first time I needed to bring on a staff member, I realized how hard it was. And I went and tried to get capital from my bank and other places, and I was unable to. My company, the work I did, just didn't fit the profile. And it was not the first time I'd been denied at a bank, not the first time I needed money, but it was the first time I came prepared. I came ready to present the success of my company, thinking that I had fit all the 5 C's of credit, and realized that even though I thought I had met the minimum requirements and had demonstrated a successful company, I still was considered high risk. That was the first impetus in which I was like, something has to be different. Something has to change.
And that's a key theme that you touch on there. So what was it that characterized you and your business that's common with other Indigenous entrepreneurs and women entrepreneurs that made this so challenging?
Well, I think one, the size of the company wasn't big enough to care about. I think two, as an Indigenous person, the types of questions they wanted around collateral, I didn't have yet. And I didn't have any assets to put up. And I was not in a position to be able to leverage any of my family's assets because they live on the reservation. And if you live on the reservation, that's trust land. And we actually are unable to get equity off of what we have back home. The only place I could turn to was putting a vehicle up, which I didn't have at the time either. So there wasn't a lot for me to be able to showcase that I could pay this back, regardless of the fact that I had contracts signed in hand that covered me not only for the full year, but would allowed me to hire 2 people. So I think things like being too small to care about, looking for capital that doesn't fit the size that banks want to lend because they're not going to make enough money off of it, and then not having the traditional 5 C's background that fits the way they're interested in underwriting is just right out of the gate, major barriers. And then you add being a woman of color, an Indigenous woman, and the historical relationship we have, not only with banking, but with capital and sort of the economy of this country. And the way we've had to have trust lands or reservation lands continues to impact all of us. And we are considered high risk investments, regardless of the fact that we know now through my work, that is not the case. And so the story is consistent. I am 100% sure there was definitely some racist bias happening in the process. But at the same time, there was nothing I could do because there was nowhere else to turn for capital.
And for context, what does your business or what did your business do at the time?
So my company we're a consulting firm, but really we're a for-profit entity that works with organizations, institutions to help them reimagine how to move resources and directly invest in leaders on the ground. We center our Indigenous ways of knowing and being as part of the process. We're not like making a product that's going to be sold on the market. We are very much like a consulting firm. And so our product is us and our thinking, our relationships, and our networks. And I think even the industry of that itself can be a really difficult thing to find capital for. But that's really, for me, I thought that's where you would have the trouble with investors and going after a different kind of investment. I assumed going into a bank asking for a loan or a line of credit should be as transactional as that, but it wasn't.
I remember that the first time I heard you was at an SBA seminar on capital access for women, and I was really, frankly, blown away by your comments on the current system of credit. In particular, you talked about this risk-based pricing, the poverty premium, the algorithms of the 5 Cs. Can you just talk about the specific ways in which this system works against women of color and Indigenous women who are trying to start new businesses?
I mentioned some of it, but some of the pieces around this is that currently in the United States, if you are a Native American Indigenous person living on tribal lands, you actually have to drive a minimum. So on my reservation, the Navajo reservation, a minimum of 30 miles to find an ATM or potentially, if you're lucky, a banking institution. And so fundamentally, geographically, because of where we live and where we're from, there are not enough lending institutions that are willing to, one, be on reservation lands, which is why we have things like predatory lending surrounding almost all of our tribal nations. And those that are willing to lend are actually really specifically only focused on credit management. And if anything, being able to provide small loans to support people with emergency needs. Anything beyond that, we have a desert of lending and financial products that are actually, one, designed for businesses. There's a lot of personal loans out there, but for small businesses that are Native owned, we don't have very many places to turn to. And so traditional lending banks like, say, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, they do have small business programs. But again, if you don't have a relationship with those banks, you're not already banking with them and you can't actually walk into them when you need to, there is an entire trust and relationship gap that also happens. And so for me, some of the larger issues is just fundamentally geographic. 2, we don't have lending institutions that understand Native people and what we need and how we need it. The kinds of lending institutions that we're looking for, like CDFIs or folks that provide alternative lending, they're not providing those types of resources to small business owners unless you're asking for a certain size. And we're not seeing enough funding available between $10,000 to $250,000. So you put all that together, that specifically focus on people who are living on Indigenous lands or reservations on tribal lands. That is sort of the historical situation we're in. And during the pandemic, when everyone was getting access to PPP loans, so many of our small businesses were unable to activate any of that money. 1, because a lot of our reservations were closed down. 2, they didn't have deep relationships with their banking institutions. And 3, the type of businesses that they were building, they weren't able to pull together the applications fast enough, or they weren't actually activated fast enough. And we didn't have enough lenders who understood Indian country. If you're also a woman, on top of that, we are also seeing that many of the women are unable to find things as simple as childcare to support them to go and do these types of activities. And then also for our women, we know fundamentally, not only is there a racial bias, there's a gender bias when we walk into these places to access resources. Overarchingly, the issue is we don't have lending and investment and financial instruments that understand the lived experience of Indigenous people in the United States. We don't have enough of them willing to take chances on us because we historically have been considered high risk.
Got it. And thank you for helping me understand a lot of these nuances that aren't easily available to those of us who don't share that lifestyle, have a lot of exposure. I really appreciate that. So in your view, what needs to change in the credit system in particular to remove some of these barriers to help women become more successful entrepreneurs?
I think a lot of this is starting to come to light, but I mean, it's not looking at things solely as a credit score and using the algorithms of the credit score as the only way that we determine people's worthiness in the sense that the credit score has been developed. We know fundamentally for a lot of people and communities across the United States, the 5 C's of credit is the prohibitive piece in being able to activate formal financing. And so there is a conversation that's happening nationally around what does a relationship-based credit score look like? How do we reimagine looking at folks' 5 C's of credit from a place of relationship, community ownership, and then I think ultimately what is patient capital to ensure folks have the runway to take the money that they're getting to get where they need to go so they can start making enough revenue to start paying it back. And I think for me and for the work we've been doing at Roanhorse and Native Women Lead has been pushing against the concept that the 5 C's of credit are the only ways to value and underwrite an entrepreneur, and in particular, a Native woman entrepreneur. We really do believe it starts with who are you? What are you making? Are you invested in where you're living? What are the other indicators that you are going to be paying this back, that you are going to actually have the ability to take care of yourself and your family and still grow this company? And a lot of that's going to come with, do you pay yourself well? How much does it cost to bring someone on? Do you have the right relationships in the right markets to actually distribute your product? And so much of this are things that so many of our entrepreneurs don't have because of the challenges they faced. And so our opportunity is to be like, well, what happens when we unlock that? And we look at them from a place of, you're going to be where you are because this is your family and your home now, tomorrow, and into the future. You're not going anywhere. So how do we look at that as part of the collateral?
There are some elements of this that to me have a parallel with microfinance because of the whole piece around you're embedded in the community, you're standing in the community that's going to speak for your reliability in paying back. So my question to you is, have you seen bright spots or emerging models in this landscape that kind of build on that or leverage those elements, but then at the amounts of credit that are more appropriate to the entrepreneurs that you're speaking of between the 10,000, 250,000? And what are those bright spots? Can you just speak about some of those?
Yeah, so absolutely. I think microfinance that really kind of came out in international communities, in developing world countries and situations, and even that language is problematic for me, but it's just that in other places where capital was very difficult to find, and we knew that particularly women were the ones that were stewarding and caretaking for the communities, and those are the ones that were the most responsible with the capital. There's so much of that historical tenets that are really important and do work. And so the microfinance piece, I think, is a real opportunity for us to look differently at what it means to trust people to do what they're going to say, because what they're doing is something that supports them where they live, the community around them, relying on each other to do what we say we're going to do. So we really saw relationship or character-based lending and microfinance as a real viable opportunity. So in the state of New Mexico, a local credit union here called the New Senda Credit Union started something called Co-op Capital. They began that in 2016. I'm proud to say we've been a part of it. When it first started, we had a PRI from a foundation, and through that PRI, we were able to support some partners on the ground to provide $10,000 personal loans using their own underwriting to support them for whatever they wanted to do. And the two categories were entrepreneurs, and the other was what we called community stabilization folks. So folks who were just trying to get through and needed emergency cash up to $10,000. The credit union supported the partner organizations to come up with their own underwriting. The credit union said, here are the parameters of the fund. It's going to be up to 5%. We're going to have a 10-year term limit for repayment. There are no penalties for early pay. And as long as folks are paying back the loan, we will then collateralize your loan up to 100%. And as part of that process, we're going to work with partners on the ground who are working with communities who we can't access as a lending institution because they no longer trust the lending institution. So you will source them. You will come up with your own criteria and underwriting process. And as long as they meet the minimum requirements for the credit union to do this legally, meaning they had to have some form of ID. If they had a relationship with the credit union, they had to have good standing with them. And outside of that, they couldn't have had any other sort of egregious debt issues or legal issues. That was it. And so our partner organizations sourced investment opportunities. And I am proud to say that we started with less than $500,000 PRI that was actually just outside of the credit union because we didn't know what was going to happen, to now the credit union fully integrating it into their entire suite of services. It is now a $4.2 million fund. We have 17 partners across the state of New Mexico. Our repayment rate is 98.5%. And as a result of that, we have moved close to $2 million to 200 plus people in New Mexico who would have never been able to activate or access capital before, and are seeing those businesses and people start to develop a meaningful relationship with a financial institution, and others take this loan, pay it off, and go and get a larger loan. We also saw an 11% increase in their credit score.
That's fantastic. Congratulations, first of all, for pulling this together. Just a couple of things on that. One is you mentioned PRI, or what is that term for those of us who don't know what that is?
A PRA is a program-related investment that comes out of a philanthropic organization. So this was philanthropic money that we received actually from the Kellogg Foundation, and it came along with grants. I will say now that PRI is about to be paid off, or has been paid off actually, and the funds that are now collateralizing this are coming directly from the credit union.
That's fantastic. It's wonderful to hear. So where do you see this going as a next step to evolve and kind of increase its reach as well as its potential depth?
Sure. So because of this, we've actually had a few of our partners on the ground who participated, who have had the chance to test and get the runway to be like, what does it mean to be someone who is now a lender, who is managing assets, who's doing direct investments? And I can say publicly, Change Labs, who is one of our partners, is now going to be partnering with the Navajo Nation and will be moving SSBCI money for Navajo and Native entrepreneurs in the Four Corners region. And they were able to start to build that because of this initiative. So now we have a Native-led organization who is now building out their own lending fund and future venture capital fund. We have an organization like Native Women Lead, which I am a co-founder of, who has also taken this initiative and partnered with Common Future and Community Credit Lab and took it from $10,000 to $50,000 fund called the Restorative Fund, and should be launching in the next few months the Revolutionary Fund, which is a $10 million fund. So the impact of that is we've seen folks get a chance to be in that decision-making seat and realize we can do this, and they're building it. The other thing is that partnership with Common Future, 2 other partners have gone out and done the same thing. So Common Future worked with Native Women Lead, Mortar, Connect Up in Minnesota to do the same thing. And so Connect Up in Minnesota is continuing to grow their fund. And what I would say consistently across everybody that's doing this is that it's allowed conversation for people who have the lived experience of these entrepreneurs to come back and say, this is the kind of capital they need. These are the type of products that they're looking for. So there's a lot of conversation around revenue-based financing. There's a lot of conversation around creating more opportunities for lines of credit, lots of opportunities for convertible debt notes. And how do we continue to create these types of products so that these entrepreneurs can not only access it, but they can build and build and build and build to continue to build that follow-on capital. They're all different because their communities are different, because no one product's going to serve everybody. But what makes them so special is they understand where they're doing this because this is their community and it is from their lived experience. So you combine that with creative products to come together, we're seeing just for the first time real explosion on what it means to trust and to have relationship as primary forms of underwriting.
That is just awesome. I'm loving everything that you're hearing. So congratulations, and we'll be rooting for your success. So a couple of things on that. One, I love how this is inculcating a sense of comfort with dealing with the financial world for these women, which is amazing. And as a second order, they themselves are getting into more what I'll call leadership positions, in a position of giving the capital so that it teaches stewardship. So it kind of has benefits across multiple dimensions. Is there a story of a woman entrepreneur from this initiative that stands out in your mind, of someone who started something, built something successfully?
Yeah, for sure. There's probably a number of them, but I'm going to start with one of my favorites. Her name is Shaye Lucero. She's from the Pueblo of Laguna here in New Mexico. Shaye's been a small business owner for at least 15 years. She's a florist. And as you can imagine, a Native American florist on a tribal reservation is not very common. And her company and the type of work she does doesn't actually, again, like what I experienced, fit what folks want to invest in. Because she's not trying to grow a floral company to hire 1,000 people and like have deliveries across the United States. She's really interested in the art of it, having a company on her tribal lands and being able to create these custom floral arrangements for her community and other communities and just bring them joy, right? So in her 15 years, I think the number is she has applied for, at least at this point, 30 or 40 grants, just contests, like she's applied for everything. And I think out of all of them has only received like maybe one award. And so much of this because she doesn't fit the profile. What I can say is like her participation in this ecosystem of Native-led products and technical assistance and support systems, she was able to actually build out a true store on her tribal lands, which for some folks, it might not sound very exciting, but if you know how hard it is to get land on your own tribal lands and how to build a company on your tribal lands is so hard. The fact that she was able to not only do that, but now have a storefront, which allows her to increase her ability to serve not only her community, but the entire state of New Mexico, is huge. And she was able to tap into our resources and take and activate one of the products. She paid it off twice as fast than anybody else. Took that same, when she paid off that first loan, she was able to go back to the lending institution and get a much larger loan to not only build out her shop, but to be able to increase her products, to increase her line of credit. And now she's in a position where she can make decisions on how she wants to grow on her reservation as a Native woman business owner. And that's the kind of safety net and agency that we want. We're not interested, but we will help you if you want venture capital. But if you just want to create a strong company where you live to take care of yourself and your family, we want to do that just as much.
That's fantastic. I'm going to be one of our big fans. So it's just great to hear that story. Two things. You mentioned venture capital. Are there examples or is there appetite from the women that you work with in getting venture capital? And have there been any success stories there as well?
Yes. So I think because of this work and this conversation of really connecting Native women entrepreneurs nationally, we're starting to see a lot of new incredible companies coming together led by women who are finally ready for that seed round. And so the opportunity now is to find the right venture capital partner who is going to not only help them get that seed round, but also support them in a way that understands what they're building. Because a lot of them are building companies not only for Native people, but for a lot of people, but they are starting from where they live. So I can say we have seen amazing companies like Totem, which is a new fintech company coming out of Oklahoma. And I can say that's one of those companies we want to watch. There's another person, she lives in New York City, Sutton King. Sutton is working in multiple sectors, but she specifically focused on how to steward care for psychedelics through an indigenous and traditional worldview. And if anyone's paying attention, that industry is it's probably blowing up, but it is in desperate need of stewardship. And so Sutton King has her finger on a number of initiatives that are going to probably be looking for that seed round and maybe eventually Series A. In the last couple of years, we have seen, Raven Indigenous Capital Partners moving into the lower United States here. And they are working with a number of incredible Native companies. We're seeing new venture firms popping up. Most recently was, I think, Tatanka Ventures out of Colorado. And like I said, Change Labs here in the Four Corners of Arizona, New Mexico, will probably also be working in that space. Native Women Lead, while we're not doing venture capital work, we are still part of the story, right? Because there's still a lot of entrepreneurs that need that funding between $50,000 to $250,000. And we are actively working to connect all these ecosystems because venture capital should be available to our community members when they're ready for it. However, we also want to create other products for those who are not interested in venture capital to just create quality companies, meaningful life, and like I said, having the dignity to be able to access the capital you need. But it is happening. We are seeing opportunities for companies to tap into some of that VC money.
That's great. So if you had to develop a capital product, and I love how you kind of broke it down into different parts, what would that look like? How do you think about creating a new capital product from scratch that would particularly meet the needs of women entrepreneurs, especially Native women entrepreneurs?
Well, I mean, I'm still new to this space, but I feel like the way we've approached the funds that we've created with Native Women Lead, like I said, we started with microfinance up to 10,000. We've built, we've learned, we've asked our network, what do you need? What's working? What's not working? Which then allowed us to then build the next one, which is our $10,000 to $50,000. And we continue to hone and ask those questions. Now, as we embark upon our biggest one, which will be $50,000 to $250,000, I feel like I can substantially say that when building these products, one of the best things that's ever happened for us is that we continually return back to who we're investing in them and ask them, what about this worked? What are the things happening around you that's impacting your ability to receive the money and pay the money back? And we are in constant conversation. So I think product development for new types of investing and lending opportunities, we have to keep going back to who it is we're trying to serve. I think it's really easy to have success with one thing and say this will now serve everybody and it's going to solve everything. But we have to be curious and constantly willing to learn what's working, what's not working. And some of that's going to come with the fact that, and this is a hard one, and I think this is a hard one across all entrepreneurial support organizations and lending institutions, is that people don't live in an entrepreneurial bubble. There's an entire world and system that they're engaging in. So there's children, there's caregiving, there's potentially violence, there's potentially situations like geographically where you can't find a place to go and get capital. And so how are we trying to see the whole system around the entrepreneur so that the products we create, well, we can't solve all of the systemic challenges they're facing. We can acknowledge it by doing things like providing tranches of funding that come along with like potentially grant money supports to help with childcare. We can look at how can we support these businesses with some of their issues around transportation. What are the other partnerships we can be building along with our products where we can build a true ecosystem and network, a safety net for them? Again, I know we all can't solve all the problems. I think the product piece of this is that we've only done what we think works and assume this is the best that we can do. But if we don't acknowledge that people live in a very fraught system and infrastructure, then we won't ever be able to truly build that scaffold process for them to continue to achieve more. It's not as technical as probably some folks are hoping to hear in terms of this answer, because I think it's not the technical piece that's the problem, because we are a very heady culture. It's the heart piece that we're missing. And I think if we can bridge the fact that lived experience and where people are matter, the products will work. But we have to start there. And I think that's been our approach from the beginning.
Yeah, I love it. What I took away as you were describing this was two big pieces. The first was the difference in how you underwrite a basic relationship, how you even look at the gaze, right? Is it a credit gaze versus a relationship-based gaze? Was like the first innovation. And the second innovation that I heard you describe was that it's a composite financial and non-financial package, which all went together, essentially driving up the viability of making that investment in this person. Those, to me, are pretty interesting and new that I haven't heard before. It sounds like you went through like a phased process where you started small and kind of built your way up. What were some of the learnings that you had in structuring these products and how you administered them that you then built into future product iterations?
Well, first, I just feel like you really simplified everything I said in a really great way. And I'm going to have to come back and be like, I'm going to steal that. And
sure.
Really good.
Steal away.
Yeah, so we actually had to build it from this tiny piece because we had to demonstrate every step of the way that we are investable as Indigenous people and Indigenous women. And we did it by not using the 5 C's of credit. So right out of the gate, we knew we had to prove immediately that our community not only is capable of receiving money, but that they will pay it back, and that we can continue to like support them on their journey. So when we first started, it was just a matter of, we have to move money, we have to move some capital. The pandemic hit and we immediately were like, we got to move this even faster. So, right out of the beginning, we had these high hopes and it really turned into an emergency product. As of a month ago, everyone has paid that off. And the pandemic started in 2020. And so we've had women pay off $10,000 in a few years. And so the learnings we have taken from that is that we knew we needed to come up with a different form of underwriting. And so that evolved into what is now called our 5 R's of rematriation, which is our response back to the 5 C's of credit. And each of the R sort of has a harken back to one of the C's. And we use that now in our underwriting. So in our due diligence process, under each R, we have different questions. So when you look at a due diligence document, you see different questions under each C. We have the same thing under the R. And we continue to take that because we're honing it and we're learning how much of this is giving us enough information so that we can increase the size of the loan. So we are learning that right now with our 10 to 50,000, which parts of our 5 R's are really successful, which part of our 5 R's we're going to have to work harder on. And we're going to take that into the next fund, which is the Revolutionary Fund, which will be at 50 to 250,000. The other thing that I think is really important in each of the designs and the learnings that we're carrying forward is that we have to build the safety net and resource system around them differently. And as we're doing that, we're also realizing how much we need to expand relationships and networks beyond just Native-led organizations, because the market is global. We live in a global world. And so that learning has been really exciting and beneficial. And so we spent a lot of time figuring out how to increase that network. The final thing, because we do believe as Indigenous people that due to land loss, which is worth today $23 trillion in the United States, that we don't want to just give people debt because we believe we've already put the collateral up, that all of our products come with some sort of forgiveness to support these women to pay them off as quickly as possible. And each of our products is designed to forgive a certain percentage of the loan if they can achieve X, Y, and Z. And part of that is because we're like, we know you're working hard and we believe that you're going to pay this off. And as you do and hit these like milestones, we go in to provide that forgiveness. And we use that from other grant dollars.
I was going to ask you, as you're building out this corpus and a whole system to fund women, not just here, but more broadly, are you seeing greater participation from the traditional financial system? And how are you able to package the financials of this proposition to be attractive to them?
Yeah, so that has been definitely the big question marks for us, is because we can create this entire system of capital access that makes folks feel cared for, seen, understood, and supported. But when they go outside of this little ecosystem, there is a whole world out there. And so right now we're learning from our network and our borrowers. And as they want to go after different types of capital, and if they're wanting to go after a different type of lending capital, what we're doing is we're providing them support to get their financials in order. So they have access to resources within our network to work with an accountant to put financials together. Usually at the microfinance stage, we're making sure we understand, do they have financial systems in place? Are they tracking their finances? And we offer them access to a ton of technical assistance where they can build those baseline systems. At the larger level, we offer them one-on-one consultants and coaching. And honestly, the consultants are the most valuable, right? Because like mentors and coaches are so important, but sometimes you just need to get stuff done. And so we have a bevy of consultants that are financial advisors, consultants, writers, and accountants who will come and work with them to basically get their packages together, but also to help them build out their decks, to help them build out the value proposition for their companies. And then alongside that, us at the team, as needed, will work with them and join them in those meetings as they desire. And so we do all of that because we know once they leave our little bubble, the system is exactly how it's always been. So our desire isn't just giving money. I think money is like the reason maybe sometimes people come, but it's actually, we're trying to bring you into the whole ecosystem, which includes your peers, sector-specific learning opportunities, accountants, HR professionals, attorneys. It also includes healing circles. It includes summits and retreats, the ability to call us and tell us what's going on. And I think that's what we're most interested in, is all of that. And we're using the capital to not only bring them in, but to work with them so that they can go out and continually build where they want to go.
So I know we have 3 minutes left. So I'll ask you this question. What is your personal biggest vision of impact of all of this work, not just on your constituents, but on the bigger world in general?
I think if there's any personal contribution we make toward putting more money into the hands of women, is that we see more women having economic agency and mobility to be safe, to be liberated, and to basically rebalance who's at the decision-making table. So we are no longer pushed out.
This has been inspiring, informative, just instructive on so many levels. I want to thank you for taking the time, Vanessa. This is amazing. Thanks for all of the work you do. Thanks for sharing it with us. And we will be rooting for you and all of your folks for sure. Want to see everything successful and make a huge impact. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm so grateful for this.
My conversation with Vanessa has to rank as one of the most eye-opening and moving I've ever had on Invisible Ink. It was jam-packed with insights, but 3 were particularly noteworthy for me. First, the walls that keep women in general, and Native American women in particular, away from the sources of financing are thick and invisible. Access looks equal in theory, but is almost impossible to achieve in reality. How can we get better at funding more women and breaking down more of these walls? This is the personal mission that drives me. Second, challenging traditional risk criteria to extend financing feels counter to economic sense and discipline, but that's simply not true. Whether it was Mohammed Yunus pioneering microfinancing in Bangladesh, or Vanessa and her colleagues pioneering a 5 R's underwriting method instead of the 5 C's of credit, the results can prove the case. And they do. And if they work, they must be adopted so the system can serve all who objectively qualify. How can we create more equitable and objective risk evaluation criteria? Last but not least, there is a place for both old and new institutions, methods, and means of financing. It's not this or that, but all of these things and more that we need to create better capital access. The question is, what parts work that we can keep, which parts don't, what needs to be tweaked, and what needs to be invented anew to ensure that a much broader swath of high-potential entrepreneurs can access capital. I finished this conversation with a much deeper appreciation of the experiences of Native American women entrepreneurs, and I dedicate this episode to the success of enterprising Indigenous women everywhere./Thanks for listening to today's episode. We have show notes and more at achieve.co. That's achiiv.co/podcast. Like what you heard? Hit subscribe and share with a friend. See you on the next episode. Now, go be an achiever.